Hi, in this screencast we're going to discuss plants, just an introduction to the plant kingdom and just the basics. It's important to know here that we don't need to understand or be experts in plant anatomy or the classification or diversity of the plant kingdom, but think big picture. Think about evolutionary adaptations that plants have acquired over their history, evolutionary history. Think about the physiology that makes them successful, and think about them in terms of hormones that we will get to, transport that we will get to, and really one of the big ones is their ability to resist desiccation or drying out. But we'll get into those down the road. So of course, the thing that everyone thinks of when we think of plants is their ability or the characteristic of being photosynthetic. So they're able to make carbon compounds using light energy, and then producing carbon compounds for any particular ecosystem. As I said before, we want to pay attention particularly to adaptations that really make plants special. And here's a couple on the slide that we want to note right away. Their ability to resist desiccation. Plants, you probably would realize this, that they can't go and walk around in search of water. So they have to be able to protect their tissues. Probably the most important adaptation of their epidermis is a cuticle, the waxy cuticle, and this protects the underlying cells from losing water. Gas exchange can take place through this. Typically on the underside of the leaf, you'll have these things called stomates or stomata, but these are essentially pores that are regulated by specific cells on either side of them called guard cells, but they allow gas exchange. Some water vapor exchange, but also carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange as well. And then we will also talk about, more specifically down the road, talking about transport in plants, but their vascular system. Very important that we understand, I would say especially xylem tissue for conducting water, but as well as phloem, or the kind of the plant sap system, where nutrients are also transported, for instance, from the leaf where they are produced by photosynthesis to all over to the plant through the rest of the plant cells where they are needed. And then the development of seeds, of course, the production of seeds and even into flowers allows them to be much more successful in reproductive terms. I think this is a pretty important slide, and first thing to note is that you are not going to be responsible for knowing the specific names or categories of these plants necessarily. However, you look at the evolutionary trends here, and you look at the development and really the specialization and adaptations of plants as you get a little bit more complex, from non-vascular plants to vascular systems, and then whether they are seedless or whether their seeds are what are called naked seeds, or we get into flowering plants and fruiting plants, which your complexity is going to really increase as you go up that evolutionary trail. So we did talk about the diversity of plant life a little bit back a while ago, but really here the first land plants, the importance here is to know that they were non-vascular. And really what non-vascular means is there has to be some give and take as to how they can nourish and find and deliver water to all of their cells. And being non-vascular, of course, they have to live in a very, very moist, wet environment, because they need to rely on essentially osmosis to move water, as well as something called capillary action, where by cohesion and adhesion properties of water molecules are kind of able to climb on themselves and other things, if you remember that. But they also, for reproductive terms, they have to be able to have sex cells or gametes that are able to travel on on their own as well. So I would say the number one thing here to understand is that the simple plants don't have a vascular system. As vascular systems evolved, the plant kingdom got a little more complex. With the vascular tissue, they're able to have a transport system for food and nutrients. Now, the first vascular plants, the ferns, still had to live in a wet environment in order to aid in reproduction, but they did develop the first vascular system. All plants show the characteristic of alternation of generations in their reproductive life cycles, and of course what we understand is that the addition of a diploid stage is that there is going to be a fertilization. In other words, there's going to be a combination of gametes from two individuals, and whenever you have that, of course, you're going to increase diversity. And diversity and variation among species is a foothold in order for any evolutionary or natural selection forces to take place. Again, on the scale of things, understanding the Gymnosperms, or naming Gymnosperms, or most of what we would be used to here would be the conifers that you are familiar with in this part of the country, of course. The thing to understand is that this is where seeds would develop. The naked seeds means there's no fruit, there's no fruiting body for protection and or nourishment or anything, but also the development of pollen, which means that the seeds are going to, or that the reproductive cells are going to be able to be transported over long distances. So that, of course, is going to increase the reproductive success, and therefore going to increase the success of the species itself. And then finally we get into the flowering plants. Flowering plants are called Angiosperms, and they're really kind of at the pinnacle of plant development. They're the most complex. They, of course, have the vascular tissue, and they typically are going to have specific male and female gametophytes. In other words, they're going to have male and female reproductive cells in all examples of flowering plants. What that means is there must be a combination of genetic cells from two individuals in order for there to be reproduction. The flower, of course, is, as you all would all know, would be a specialized structure for sexual reproduction. It's able to, along with the fruits, there's all sorts of specialized adaptations that have developed in order to increase their sexual reproduction success. There's many diverse examples of flowering plants. And really, most of what you would see, most of the plants that you would see, are actually flowering plants. From the grasses that you see to, of course, the flowers, and most of even things you would call the weeds in the ditch or growing in the sidewalk. And again, we are not responsible for, you won't need to know even the structures of these flowers, but just note that due to these specialization, this all is going to be something that is going to have reproductive properties that are going to help the success of reproduction, of sexual reproduction. Whether it's the male and female parts of the flower, the ovary that is going to likely develop into part of a fruit, for instance. But again, flowering plants have developed ways to increase their success through reproduction. Flowers, they're pretty. An important idea too is the coevolution between the flowers and the pollinators. And really what that is all about are the adaptations of the flowers, the way to attract pollinators, and the way to present the pollen and the reproductive parts of the flower in order to make contact with insects or birds or little mammals, or even if you've ever had to pick burrs off of your dog, that is just a genius of the reproductive strategies of the plants. Not to mention the adaptations of the fruiting plants that are really tasty to not only humans, but of course to animals that may eat them in the wild and then disperse them with a lot of nutrient-rich fertilizer far away from the parent plant. It just increases the reproductive success. So we just touched upon the introduction of the plant kingdom. Mostly what we hit upon here was just the evolutionary trends, the evolutionary adaptations that also are going to make groups of plants successful.